Chapter 7. Humanity. Dylan and Wade exchanged glances. With careful steps, they grabbed their bows and headed toward the guttural clamor. Once they were close enough to see the horde, they knelt and took a moment to work out a plan. Wade pointed out the 10 sick milling around directly in front of them. Dylan nodded toward another 8 restlessly pacing the forest off to the right. 6 of the 18 had compromised limbs. Some so bad they did little more than clumsily drag a leg along behind them, causing a pull-hop kind of walk. Dylan glanced at 2 sick who seemed to have little difficulty walking. Their potential for speed was troubling. Other than that, it was almost impossible to discern much about the group of sick. So much dirt layered their clothing and body it was difficult to tell the original color of their clothes, hair or skin. The whites of their wild eyes seemed stark against their filthy faces and snarled messy hair. Red foamy drool hung in long wobbly ribbons from the lips of the sickest of them. Dylan sadly shook his head. It was the fortunate ones who died quickly. Those who lingered only suffered, roaming and frightened. And this group looked as though it'd been out here a long time. He stared at their eyes. Was there any thought or emotion left in these people? But if there was anything at all, it was confusion and terror. For the most part, though, their eyes seemed vacant. And it was better that way. When Wade started to move to the left, Dylan put a hand on his arm. He gestured toward a sick man and woman caught in the brush. Without success, they tugged and pulled at the thin branches, weeds, and thorns binding their legs, seemingly unable to understand why they were trapped. Although just as dirty as the others, their lips were clear of the bloody froth. Dylan's finger curled around the crossbow trigger as he ached to help them to stop the inevitable progress of the disease. Soon they too would have the red spit and slowly suffocate from it. But it wasn't his place to do that. Not yet. The time would surely come when anyone who came across someone sick would have the authority to take care of them. But Tom was the man in charge of these matters, and as sheriff, he wanted them taken to the closest containment area. Dylan didn't really agree that course of action was the best for these people. Wade eyed Dylan and whispered, "What are we doing here, D?" Dylan sighed and lowered his bow. "What Tom wants. It's a crock, is what that is. Tom likes to believe there's still some kind of government left. It's what holds the man together. I ain't taking that away from him." Dylan pointed through the trees. "There's a cabin back in there. If it's empty, it's as good a place as any to corral them until we get help moving them to the detention center." Wade circled around to the cabin, made sure it was empty and came back to Dylan. Then the 2 brothers walked toward the horde of sick. Some half-heartedly limped toward them, but others moved closer to the entangled man and woman as if unwilling to leave them. "It's okay," Wade said. "That'll work too." The 2 men stayed just in front of their shuffling, stumbling followers, leading them to the cabin. After moving them through the front door of the house, the brothers walked out the back, leaving the sick inside. Dylan and Wade returned to 6 left outside, for roamed and the man and woman still stuck in the brush. The roamers were the ones who worried Dylan. They were more limber and would be faster than the ones already secured. He tensed and faked a move toward them. The 4-6 breathing quickened, causing them to snarl. They hesitated for a moment then hurled themselves at Dylan and Wade. Dylan scurried backward, away from the horde. Wade turned and ran toward the cabin, luring them to it. 3 followed Wade. 1 went for Dylan. Still scrambling backward, Dylan lost his footing, going down hard and huffing a loud breath. In the next second, the sick man was on him, teeth snapping. Dylan shoved him away, pulling in some much-needed air. The smell of the crazed man almost caused him to retch. His aroma came from not only his lack of hygiene but the smell of rotting flesh. The sick man was on him again. That close, he was overwhelmingly large, massive, and still terribly strong. Dylan had to work to keep him from ripping at his flesh. There was no doubt the ill man would do it. Between his scummy, dripping teeth were bits of skin and muscle. It had probably been this group who had been at the cattle. Holding his breath as he fought, Dylan punched his attacker and quickly reached toward his belt for his knife. Before he could get to it, he was forced to bring his hand up to stave off the iron-like hands beating him. Dylan rolled from one side to the other, avoiding as many blows as possible. On his second turn, he again made a move for the knife. He strained to hold the man back with a hand on his shoulder. With Dylan's focus on retrieving a weapon, the sick man slipped from his hand. The next second, teeth chomped at his face. Forgetting the knife, he shoved the guy and held him back. Red spittle dripped toward him, and Dylan quickly turned his head. Wet gooiness rolled down the side of his neck. He shivered, swallowing the ache in the back of his throat to avoid vomiting. The teeth were at him again. Dylan grunted and gave an exasperated sigh. He needed to get this guy down. He'd had a lot more fight in him than he'd thought. Dylan pushed on the sick slimy neck, doing his best to hang onto its spit-covered surface. His fear was that the sick's head would slip out of his hand and slam on top of him. He did the only thing he could do, he punched his attacker. Once, twice, 3 times. It didn't faze him. Glad he had never faced this man before he became ill, Dylan positioned himself at a better angle. The diseased man twisted his fingers through Dylan's hair and brought his face closer. Dylan's stomach coiled tighter as he realized he was becoming more and more immobile. He bucked and jerked, trying to get away, but the big man held him fast. The gnashing jaws got closer and closer. Dylan's arms shook as he redoubled his efforts to push the man away. His mind spun, and he tried to pull inspiration from his jumbled thoughts. He may not be bigger than this guy, but he sure as blazes better be smarter. The sick raised his arm, grasping at his neck. It gave Dylan an opening. As the man's fingers clasped and tightened on his throat, he pulled his arm back. Clenching his fist, he slammed it into the sick's armpit. The man let out a small, ragged cry and expelled a great repulsive breath. Dylan gagged. Before he could roll away, the man was at him again. He threw up his left arm to protect his face and sent a hard punch with his right to the sick's face. His attacker went down, stunned. Dylan pulled his knife as he jumped away, but the man lay motionless. Dylan paced first one way then the other and let out a great huff of air. Then he raised his head to look for his brother.